Well, good morning, everyone. We're a little bit late starting, but not too bad for a snowy, bad traveling morning. January 20th, and we have our legislative council draft person with us this morning, Michael O'Grady. And we're going to be going through the Right to Farm bill. Before we get started, I think we all got a letter from Farm Bureau person asking about small farms not being regulated by the RAPs, and so Michael, what is the size of farms that the small farms, they all have to be regulated to a certain point? I thought it was 50 because that's where we count, but could you clear up the?
Sure. So there are actually, people think there's only 3 tiers of farms: small farm, medium farm, and large farm. There's actually 4. There's large farm. I'll work backward. Large farm, that's over 700 mature dairy cattle. Medium farm, between 200 and 699. Regulated small farm, which is, or certified small farm, which is between 50 and 199. And then a small farm, which is between 5 and 49. So a certified small farm needs to annually submit a certification that they're complying with the RAPs. The small farm that's not certified still has to comply with the RAPs. They are still subject to the RAPs. They just do not need to certify annually their compliance. But they are still subject to the RAPs, and they want to be subject to the RAPs, because that is how you qualify for an exemption from municipal zoning. That is how you ultimately qualify for exemption from Act 250. That's how you qualify for the exemptions from stormwater. You want to be subject to the RAPs if you have animals and you are a farm.
Yeah, so somehow they got mixed up on the little guys that they don't have to be certified, but a lot of them probably are certified then, but they have to meet the requirements regardless.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think her question ultimately was, she wanted to make sure that they will be protected under the right to farm law. And that's another reason why it's a good idea to be following the RFPs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Irene.
And one of the phrases that I think she uses here, I know she uses, is that they're not enforced or inspected by the agency. And that would make sense, right? The agency only has so much time for enforcement and checking up, and they're probably not necessarily checking up on a farm with 5 cattle.
If
But
they're
they should
shipping
still
milk,
obey them, right?
they'd be
Well, if they're
inspected.
shipping milk,
Okay.
and any enforcement complaint that the agency receives, they respond to. So enforcement is largely citizen complaint driven. So maybe they're just a well-run farm that isn't inspiring any complaints. But it doesn't mean that the agency doesn't have enforcement authority over them. The agency has a wide universe of enforcement authorities over them, depending on what they're doing. If they're dairy farm, as the chair just said, they will have inspections from the dairy inspector. If they're maple, then they have to meet the maple rules. If they are eggs, they have to meet the eggs rule. You know, and there's just the agency has a lot of authority. They don't flaunt it, I guess, but they have a lot of authority.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess, are you gonna get back to them, Irene?
Sure.
Yeah,
Much.
and, because I think she forwarded that to all of us, so that would be good. And, so anyhow, this morning, we're gonna go through the draft, 23-0123. And, that, is in regards to, our right to farm stuff. And Michael's gonna go through what we have, the draft. Are you gonna be able to do what we have existing, the draft? And then, did Linda get hold of you? Because yesterday we talked a lot about, the RAPs and where that would fit in, as well as, getting rid of the trespass stuff, or.
Sure. I'm prepared to talk about all of it, and from Senator Campion's request for a side-by-side, I thought it would be helpful to do the walkthrough in comparison to the existing law.
Yeah,
And so if you would like me to, I can start to do that.
sure.
So this is Mike O'Grady with the Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm gonna do a walk through a draft bill. It has not been introduced yet, requested by Senator Starr to amend the existing right to farm law. And in my walkthrough, I'm going to compare the bill, the draft bill, to the existing statute in 12 VSA chapter 195. Before I go through that, let's talk about a little bit what the right to farm law generally does. It is a court procedure law, and it dictates how a court will handle a nuisance claim that is filed with the court. It is not a bar to a nuisance claim. It is not a bill that says that no one can ever bring a nuisance claim. It is a court procedure. It dictates how a judge will handle a nuisance claim brought against the farm, and it sets out the standards for that. There are states that do have simple bars on nuisance actions if relatively minimal criteria are met. Now, in drafting the bill for Senator Starr, I based the bill on the Kentucky right to farm law, because as we went through the other day, when I showed you a couple other examples from other states, it's a pretty simple law. And it does apply to trespass as well as nuisance, but that is a policy decision for you. And I can just explain that when we get there. So with that background, I'm going to ask if you have any questions, and then I'll go right into the.
Brian, you say something about trespass. Why did you raise it? You pulled something out, or you added, or I'm just trying to understand.
The case, the Addison County case last year, where a lot of the anxiety and the interest arose from, involved both trespass and nuisance.
Okay.
So if you were going to address that anxiety and the concern that was raised by that case,
Thank you.
you could, if you want to make that policy decision, also apply the protection to trespass as well as nuisance. Many states do, but not all. It is a policy decision. It will inspire further interest from advocates that don't support the changes.
Yesterday, the attorney for the agency, Steve Hall, he talked about 4 different issues too that he wondered if it needed to be in the bill because it was kind of an inviting issue to get people. And I don't,
Sure, I can talk about all of that.
yeah,
The fact of the matter is that these laws are factual. They depend on what happens on a farm, the neighboring activity, and the criteria are usually factual. They can be involved criteria, similar to what's in Vermont's current law, or they can be very basic criteria, similar to what's in Kentucky, that the farm operation was in existence for a year and it wasn't a nuisance when it initiated. That's it. And they get the protection. That's pretty basic.
now, our rewrite, you kind of followed Kentucky.
Well, Kentucky.
Yeah, so we'll get into that as you go through the bill.
Okay, yeah. So the first thing I want to note is what the findings and purpose are for both the existing right to farm and the draft. They are the same. The existing findings and purpose would not change, and I would direct you to the bottom of the first page where there's really the finding and purpose. Where it says the General Assembly finds that agricultural activities are potentially subject to lawsuits based on the theory of nuisance, and these suits encourage and could force the premature removal of the farmlands and other farm resources from agricultural use. As the purpose of this chapter is to protect reasonable agricultural activities conducted on the farm from nuisance lawsuits. Before I go through, now that you know what the purpose is, does everyone know what a nuisance lawsuit is?
I don't really.
So under Vermont law, case called Myrick versus Peck, they basically laid out what a private nuisance is. So there's a duty of every person to make reasonable use of their property so to occasion or avoid unnecessary damage or annoyance to your neighbors. So basically, it is interference with the use and enjoyment of another's property that is unreasonable and substantial. So your activity on your property interferes with the use and enjoyment of the neighbor's property, and that interference is unreasonable and substantial.
So an example of that, Brian, would be I'm the farmer and you're the neighbor, and your daughter's getting married Saturday. So I decide, because I don't really like you very well, I decide to spread manure on the field next to the neighbor's property Saturday morning, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, stuff like
Yeah.
that shouldn't happen.
Right, right.
And neighbors deserve to be protected in a situation like that. And be able to bring some claims.
So there's also something called a public nuisance, where the use and enjoyment of your property affects not just an individual property owner or a small group, but the public as a whole. And it can effectively rise to a health risk. There is a definition of public nuisance in statute. I can provide that, or actually in case I can provide that to you at a later date if you would like.
Yeah.
But generally what you're talking about with the right to farm is private nuisance. It's the individual or a group of small individuals, small group of individual property owners bringing a claim against a neighboring property.
So does it always have to be neighboring is,
It doesn't,
what's neighboring?
Right.
mean? So,
that's a good
and
question.
I'll give you an example, as they started raising hemp in the valley I live in, which was as the crow fly, probably a half a mile away. And as they started harvesting in the fall, you could smell it everywhere.
Mhm. So it is, that doesn't mean that you have to be immediately adjacent to that boundary.
That's what I was asking.
You can show that whatever the activity is. I'll give an example. One of the cases that I know about from prior experience. It was a brewery in Pennsylvania. And at certain parts of the day, they would emit whatever they were emitting. And it stunk up the entire town. And because of weather patterns, it was the southern part of the town as opposed to the northern part of the town. It's like, and they weren't adjacent to the brewery, but the small group of property owners in the southern part of town brought a claim for nuisance, and they won.
Okay.
So most towns that hosted a paper mill.
That's
That
right.
was
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I
Oh my
remember
goodness.
that
that.
was a constant nuisance.
Yes.
Yeah.
People put up. with it.
Well, people put up, if the paper mill had been there 100 years and you moved to town,
Sure.
you knew it was gonna be there. I only bring up the hemp because as they started growing, it was a new smell and that no one expected.
My favorite, and I don't know how this case was resolved, but I know that it was brought. Hong Foy Sriracha. They make it at a plant in California.
What is it?
It's the hot sauce, the Sriracha hot sauce.
Okay.
And so it got really popular and they started producing more. And so there was more of their emissions, which meant more of the kind of secondary chili pepper going out into and people complained that it was affecting their use and enjoyment of their property because it was affecting their ability to breathe, their eyes.
Did it burn your eyes or?
Yeah.
Sneezing.
Geez.
Wow.
So I don't know how that was resolved, but that probably would have been a public nuisance because it was
Widespread.
widespread.
Yeah.
So moving on, the definitions define what is protected. And it's agricultural activities. And you'll see that they are the same in the existing law and the draft. But there's two key things that I want to note. So you'll see the first two subdivisions. These were added after the Trick of the Ox case in 2003 to specifically list what consists of agricultural activities. It includes things like, which I think you all consider to be farming, like raising Christmas trees, maple sap, orchard crops, maple syrup production, etc. It also includes products principally produced on the farm. So those businesses that have those farms that have businesses that produce, say, compost or pies, or those are, if they're principally produced on the farm, they are farming and they get protection as well.
What about, would hemp be a fiber or do we need to spell that out as a agricultural product?
It is a horticultural crop, so it already,
Yeah.
and in the hemp chapter, there is a statement that it is farming, and because it is the farming of a horticultural crop. Now, cannabis is not. Cannabis, clearly, there's a statement that cannabis is not farming. So last year, you gave small cultivators, the 500 square feet cultivators of cannabis, some protection for farming, but not all protection. They got zoning and Act 250 protection, but they did not get all protection.
So would they get the odor thing?
They would not get the protection of the right to farm.
So are they not considered farming?
No, when cannabis was originally legalized, there were certain key members in the House who did not want cannabis to be regulated as farming.
Yeah, I remember that, but I'm asking, where are we with this?
Only small, it is still generally not farming. But small cultivators receive a few of the benefits of farming, what I call the regulatory benefits. They're exempt from municipal regulation, they're exempt under Act 250, and they are not disqualified from use value.
So that was gonna be my question, if they aren't a firm, would that disqualify you from, on the agricultural side from current use?
What I have always said is if you're gonna be growing cannabis outdoors, probably parcel that off so it is not treated as your farm. So then you can grow and not have a secondary effect on the rest of your farm. Because
So, well, this is a totally separate subject from, do you mind if I ask? Or,
No,
Or
no,
can-
that's right.
so someone was a landowner and someone came along and said, I'll rent your 4 or 5 acres to raise cannabis on a piece of the meadow. They would have to remove that 5 acres from the current use program and pay the penalty.
they don't have to. They don't have to, but they would potentially lose their current use enrollment for those 5 acres. And the.
Well, then,
Are
if
5
you
acres.
potentially could use that, it would mean you're out and then you'd have to pay the penalty.
Then you have to get a penalty.
So I would say in my community, average 5 acre piece of land is probably worth 130 or 40,000. So you would have to pay
Fair market value.
$13,000 or $14,000 to remove it so somebody could use it.
But if you wanted to grow 1,000 square feet of cannabis, that's what a small plot is.
No, I'm just, I can see with more and more land that, as people go out of farming and they try to hang on to their land, they're going to be trying to rent it for other uses. And that might be a use that they might consider. So, and I get 1,000 square feet, but you know, I just want to be clear.
So that regulatory concern is I would think something that cannabis cultivators should be aware of, because it has happened before for industries that are not cannabis cultivation. I think we all remember, or many of you remember, the issue with Vermont Compost on their East Montpelier farm, where they were not principally producing that compost on the farm because their inputs, the ingredients for their compost, most of it was coming from off that. They were leasing that site on that East Montpelier farm. It was determined that that part that they were leasing was not exempt from Act 250. If it's not exempt from Act 250, there's probably a good argument it's not eligible for use value.
Mhm.
Right, and so they're not the same eligibility requirements, but they can influence each other.
And from that point on, that piece of land that you remove would probably could pay as much as 10 times greater in property taxes.
Do most farmers put all their land in current use? I owned the farm for 20 years. I didn't put an acre in
Yeah, but
because I know the rules and it can get really bad.
I think a lot of small farmers, other than their house site, they've had, barns have been eligible to be in current use. So most small farmers that are dairy farmers, I think, put everything in.
I mean, to me, it really depends on the assessment of your property value. If you're in Chittenden County where the fair market value is unbelievable right now. You would want to really manage your tax burden by putting this property.
Well, I live in a ski town.
Right.
So everybody put everything in because, your property taxes, but, you pay 10 times. What,
And the land that you would want to take out to grow cannabis on would be your river bottom land or high priced, well-drained soils. So you're gonna pay a lot of money.
well, I think it gets at your issue of, your Act 250 issue. You've got people now in their barns wanting to do all sorts of different things to make the barns profitable enough so you can keep it. So as someone moves from a small dairy, and quite frankly, if you're a hillside farm, a lot of those big farms that are 1,000 cows are not going to want your little meadow that's 5 acres.
No.
So what alternatives, somebody growing vegetables might, but you are taking, it is one avenue that is not an option for people moving on.
See, yesterday, while you were there in the say the small plots are outnumbering the big grows 3-1, I think.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of people doing little lots, 200 and, well, I don't know that, we can figure it out because it's a third, 2/3, 272 total lots.
Well,
or
I
license.
think there was, with the 50 odd coming in and I think I totaled the two of them is 318.
318, so 200 of them are 200 and a few are small plots,
What's this, like,
1,000 square feet.
okay,
And there's still, 100 that are bigger plots or indoor grow. But anyways.
Thank you for letting me digress into this, but I think that for people that are going out of farming, thinking about how do I diversify, what can I do with my land as
going.
keep going, that I think a lot of people in the public might say, well, I could rent it to, but you can't.
I wanted to talk about that anyway, because last year, in the effort to amend the right to farm, there was an amendment to the activities that received protection. And one of the additions was adding farming as defined in Act 250, which is 10 VSA 6001. Some of the accessory on-farm business discussion that I've heard involves amending the Act 250 definition of farming to include accessory on-farm businesses. If that happens, it would automatically give those accessory on-farm businesses nuisance protection under the right to farm.
So if we can get that done, then you're in,
Well, this isn't me, but
or
I
your neighbor or somebody.
Well, for right now, I've got, I've got a small organic farm still renting my meadow leaf.
So you don't need to grow marijuana.
I don't need to. Or I don't need to find somebody to rent my land to do that.
So I wanted to note that I put those new definitions that were added to the scope of the right to farm last year on the last page of the document that Linda just gave you, so you can see what is additionally protected under the right to farm now.
Okay, Michael. So-
All right, so moving on, now you get to where the right to farm actually changes. And you'll see this is the standard. Remember that the existing standard provides the farm the rebuttable presumption that it does not constitute a nuisance if 4 factors are met. That it's conducted in conformity with federal and state and local law, it's consistent with good agricultural practices. It is established prior to surrounding non-ag uses, and it is not significantly changed. The draft would strike all of that entirely. So the rebuttable presumption goes away. The 4 criteria, factual criteria that would need to be met, and that the court in the Addison County case kind of focused on in finding that the right to farm did not apply, they are no longer the criteria under the draft. There's no way to overcome the presumption by showing that it's a significant interference with the use and enjoyment of the neighboring property, because there is no longer a presumption. And so what the standard then becomes, again, based on Kentucky, no agricultural activity. So how those 4 criteria, that scope of activities that constitute ag activity, shall be or become a nuisance or trespass when the activity has been in operation for more than 1 year and the activity was not a nuisance or trespass at the time the activity was initiated. So that is Kentucky. That is where Kentucky stops, right? 1 year.
Beyond that.
Nothing else. 1 year, and it was not a nuisance or trespass when the activity initiated. That's it. Now, in drafting the bill, there was concern or interest, I should say, from some of the farmers involved that they wanted the concept of their compliance with the ag water quality requirements, their compliance with the RAPs to be noted as something that gives them the nuisance protection.
If they're in full compliance.
Yeah, and so you'll see that in this draft, different from Kentucky, that if the activity complies with the RAPs, then it also receives that they are disjunctive. 1 year and you weren't a nuisance or trespass when you started, or you're in compliance with the RAPs or the other ag water quality requirements. It's not an and. You don't have to have the 1 year and it's in or.
But, so you could move to a farm and in 6 months, if you were,
Complying with the RAPs,
you would be,
yes. Now,
Yes, what, I mean, can you just finish that?
yes, you would receive the protection.
Okay.
see, and I don't know if we want to go that far or not. See, you have to be doing your practices for at least a year. And if the neighbor complains after that, the second or third year,
The neighbors, yeah.
but you could move to a farm and the neighbor could be there. And you could be in compliance with the RAPs just to get started. You should, maybe in 6 months, you get signed up with your agency and your required ag practices, you're in compliance, then the neighbor is kind of in trouble.
So yesterday, Laura DePietro said she didn't think the RAPs were a good standard because, or the ag water quality is a good standard because they only have jurisdiction over nuisance type activities for large farms. Because the large farm rules do have controls over nuisance vectors, flies, odor, noise, etc. So basically, she made the argument that maybe the RAPs and the MFO rules aren't the best things for a determination of nuisance. And that's you asked me to like note where arguments were raised or issues were raised by the witness. I think you've got ways around that. One of the other state laws that I showed you the other day was Pennsylvania, where if their nutrient management plan or the activity was approved by the agency or approved as part of their nutrient management plan, then it received the nuisance protection. I mean, if the issue is going to be odor and the spreading is approved as part of your nutrient management plan, shouldn't that potentially receive nuisance protection? And so you have some options there based on what some of the other states have done.
Well, I'm wondering out loud, which is dangerous. I wonder if they have to meet the RAPs in their nutrient management. I mean, how can your RAPs, required ag practices work without your nutrient management plan working anyways? So we'll have to ask Bill hey, Bill, are you on?
I am.
If you meet your required ag practices, wouldn't your nutrient management plan have to be up to date and in force?
It would have to be up to date and in force to be certified that you're in compliance. But it wouldn't necessarily have to be up to meet the RAPs. You have to observe the requirements of the required ag practice. But to be in compliance, your nutrient management plan would have to comply with the requirements that would satisfy the state.
So why couldn't both items be mentioned?
Well, I assume they both could be mentioned individually to achieve the objective.
So,
I mean, it's an option. I don't know if you want to do markup now or not, but it's
Well,
something that,
we've got to talk through this, kind of figure it out, the committee gotta understand what, where we are with this. But, so,
could I just finish the walkthrough?
yeah,
So one of the things that many states provide is when that nuisance or trespass protection doesn't apply, and it usually involves when someone's been negligent or willful or intentional in their actions. I think Mr. Rowell yesterday said that he had received input that it shouldn't be negligent because that just basically shifts the plaintiff's opportunity from a rebuttable presumption to an argument that the activity was negligent. I think that's a valid criticism. But I think the policy discussion that the committee may want to have is, do you want to protect certain activities that are that are intentional or willful or go beyond just the person that's complying with the law and doing agriculture as it's defined. You gotta, it's a policy decision if you want to say certain actions aren't going to be covered. You know, the example that was given in the House last year for this was apparently there was a guy, a neighbor, who didn't like his farm neighbor spreading manure. So the neighbor, the new neighbor, not the farmer, would park his car so that the farmer couldn't access a road to get to a field.
On whose property?
It was on the farmer's property. And so
I can imagine what happened there.
the farmer would spread manure on the person's car.
But he was on the farmer's property.
It is,
That's a right away.
yeah, it was a right of way.
Right away, okay.
And so, do you want that kind of activity that would be a trespass, potentially. And so does that get protected?
Well, I mean, the neighbor caused the farmer grief because he didn't want to smell manure. I mean, he caused his own grief, the neighbor did. You know, you block a right of way and that would happen in Troy too, maybe. If that's.
Where did it happen?
Actually, they told me, but I can't remember.
Okay.
But if you're, you know, and you're spreading, you know, you got 2 or 3 spreaders going and you're using it, and then all of a sudden somebody blocks so you can't get to your field.
Well, I mean,
Well,
ideally, there'd be maybe some kind of, I don't know, mediation or something before they spreads it on the
Well,
car.
you
But
either
yeah,
hook on with a chain and pull it out of the way,
yeah.
or.
Call the cops, say this is a right of way. I mean, I don't know.
Call the cops.
Something
They'd
before
be
you
too
spread.
busy, you wouldn't see them for a week. And, no,
So what happened with the case?
I don't know if there was a
Oh, you don't know.
resolution was. It was just, it was people providing anecdotes
Yeah.
of the issues between neighbors
Yeah,
and
yeah.
farmers. And that was probably
It's
the.
quite, it's been quite common for people that are hunting, that park in the middle of that meadow, for them to come back after they park there and find some additional something on their vehicle. That's not uncommon.
Right, and I would say that vehicle was trespassing.
Yes, was
The
trespassing.
hunters were not trespassing. But the vehicle.
Well, if the land's posted.
Well, if the land was posted, yes. then they
yeah,
were
they all were.
So it'd be
That
good, it'd be
isn't
helpful to
here.
me to hear from the
But
League of
not-
Cities and Towns on this.
No.
I don't know who's running the League of Cities and Towns now, but it'd be helpful
Karen
to
wants to.
get their
So-
thoughts.
So moving on, the other change, significant change from existing law to the draft is to make kind of a policy statement to say that the chapter is remedial in nature. And when a law is remedial in nature, it is intended to be something to fix a problem, to basically correct the existing legal situation. And remedial statutes are supposed to be given broad effect and broad interpretation by the courts. So it's a statement that this law is remedial, it fixes something that is needs redress, and it's a correction for the public good. So that's what that statement is intended to mean. And then there's a statement about an ag activity not losing its nuisance protection if certain things happen. If a farm changes ownership or ceases operation for a time being, it doesn't lose its nuisance protection just because it changed ownership or ceased an activity for a while.
What about switching activities?
Well, if the next subdivision down, if they're changing crops, that doesn't lose the protection, and further down, changing a method of farming or conversion of farming practices or ag activities to other farming methods, practices, or activities also does not forfeit the nuisance protection for that farm. Yeah. So that is kind of a statement to courts. Just because somebody changes, just because something changes on the farm doesn't mean that the farm no longer benefits from nuisance protection under the law. And that really is the draft. It changes that standard, moves it from a rebuttable presumption based on 4 criteria that can subsequently be rebutted to blanket protection. If you're in operation for a year, the activity was not a nuisance or trespass when it began, or you're complying with your ag water quality requirements, whether that's your LFO, MFO, or RAP. And it says that this law is a remedial statute fixing an issue in the law, and that certain changes on a farm do not forfeit the nuisance protection that the farm is afforded by statute.
So did you just add in water quality and that stuff?
No, because everybody refers to the RAPs,
As
and that's not like Amanda St. Pierre. Amanda St. Pierre has to comply with the LFO rules, right? Because they're a large farmer. I think a couple of their farms are large farms because they have more than one. And a couple of them are MFOs, and they have to comply with, those are all ag water quality requirements. So they are built on top of the RAPs. So the RAPs are general application, but if you go into, if you're medium farm, you get the medium farm rules. If you're large farm, you get the large farm rules.
but they all have to meet the water quality standards to meet the RAPs.
Right, and the shorthand way to do that legally is to reference, and you'll see this on page 4 of the side by side. They comply with 60 state chapter 215. With that's where your permit requirements are for MFO, LFO, or RAP.
So are they in Irene?
Can you just walk me through why it's an or here and not an and?
Well, that is actually a policy decision. You could say they'd have to be in activity for a year, wasn't a nuisance at the time it initiated, and if that disjunctive versus conjunctive is up to you.
Does it cut out many more farms, do you think?
It would provide more protection, yes, if it was an or.
Yeah, because the way it is, in 6 months, you wouldn't have to make a whole year if you're meeting your standards.
Protect.
So, yeah, that's a pretty 2-letter word. I mean. versus a 3-line.
Right, I'm thinking about, with the devil's advocate hat on, does this leave any room for anybody to complain about a farm? If it's an or,
Well, is there a way?
I mean, to legitimately complain and win, right? I mean,
Right now, you would, and this was the testimony from Mr. Rao's consultant, I guess. Negligence, you would argue negligence.
okay, rather than nuisance.
So, thank you. Is there a definition of the word negligent? In other words, I'm trying to understand if a farmer is complying with the requirements of 6 VSA chapter 215, if we leave or in, that would be one piece where that farmer would be protected. Would proving that he wasn't or she wasn't complying constitute negligence? Or is there a more?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
You use words like willful and something else
Right.
earlier.
Well, intentional,
Yeah.
but that's not in the bill right now. I didn't put intentional or willful.
But negligent. How-
Negligence is when a person has a duty of care. And that duty of care can be a common law duty. You don't run people over in the road, that's generally common law, but it's also statutory as well. And you can have that duty of care that arises both from the common law and from a statutory requirement. And if you fail to meet that duty of care and damage results, then that is negligence. So what constitutes the duty of care is often a large part of a negligence claim. And you could argue that compliance with the RAPs is your duty, is that farm's duty, and your failure to comply. But not all failures to comply with the RAPs are something that, some of it is from what you would call an act of God, the weather.
Right.
Some is equipment malfunction. That's not necessarily negligence. One of the big issues was a custom applicator was applying manure on a farm. It was a slope that led down to Lake Champlain. The spreader broke midway on that slope, and it basically released the contents of the wagon down the hill.
Yikes.
That probably isn't negligence.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I'd love to hear from the league, if that's all right, and League of Cities and Towns, and get their take on it.
yeah.
Yeah. Right, there's that too.
Yeah,
So-
I don't know. if we-
And I don't know if there, I don't know what are there, are there environmental consequences that I'm not thinking of in all of this? That's why it'd be good to hear from some environmental folks.
Can I
Yeah,
respond to that? The regulatory regimes.
yeah,
For ag water quality, for water quality at ANR, for wetlands, for all the other, they are not affected. If you are a farm and you somehow benefit from nuisance protection, but you then dig up your wetlands, you're still subject to environmental.
if there's, yeah,
Yeah, and the same thing with polluting.
right,
If you go miss your buffer
yeah,
on the ditch or brook, and you put manure in the brook or when you're spreading, hey, you're in trouble.
So,
You leave mud in the
Right.
road, even from your tires. You can be in trouble with, putting debris in the highway.
Right, it becomes a safety hazard.
Yeah,
so under the draft, the way you've got it, if you're in business for a year, over time on farms, dairy farms and different farms, and I'll use manure management as over time, practices around manure management have changed. So I've been in business for a number of years. I changed my practice around my manure management, and it creates a different smell. Under this, you would be totally protected and the neighbor would have no say.
That's probably,
as long as it was agriculture.
As long as it stayed within agriculture but so I have lived next to you for years. It's all, and then all of a sudden it's something that is a much more pungent smell. I have no say.
right, because under the definition of agricultural activities, it includes a change of methods and practices.
I'm just checking, I'm old school, the old spreader that went out that, other than maybe a little drop-ins on the road, didn't smell all that bad, for most
Right.
people. And then as you went to pits and spreading, the smell was dramatically different. I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah,
And now, a lot of our big farms, they've installed digesters. And you don't get the smell again because that's gone. And
unless you're actually in the digester and then you smell it, but then you don't have senses for like 24 hours, was my experience.
oh yeah, you fell in the
I didn't
digester.
fall in it. It was one of the concrete ones where you're at nose level with the manure intake. And let me tell you, I didn't smell for a while after that.
That'll teach you to keep your nose out of the digester.
But that's only in the digester itself. It's not anywhere outside.
Right. It was in the whole
Yep.
digester.
Yep.
Foundation.
Did you have a question?
I do. Someone complained to me this summer about the smell of sewage or whatever it was being put on a nearby farm, and they were concerned about health effects. Has anyone looked into the health effects of inhaling, not just what might be a smell that they don't like, but the wafting of pathogens onto their property? And is that something we should look at?
I mean, the nutrient management plan is supposed to have account for some of that. And you should probably talk to Laura DePietro about how those plans work for the purposes of control of both runoff and odor and spread. There's a standard. They're all supposed to be designed to the Natural Resource Conservation Services 590 standard. It's basically a national standard. But she can tell you how they work.
With the injectors, which many farms have started using, there's no odor at all. It's all right in the soil. You have another meeting?
I do. I have to go up to House Ag.
Yeah.
So if you can excuse me.
So how do we, what's not working right now, would you say, out there? I mean, what is the real big problem that we're trying to really solve?
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Just that it really hasn't been updated for a long time, over 20 years. Practices have changed dramatically over those numbers of years. The farm numbers have changed dramatically over those 20 years, and the farms have gone out, and in many cases, homes have been built closer to the,
Yeah.
instead of grassland being there, there's houses there. So the farmer that's left on the road has a lot more neighbors than they used to have. And
Yeah, that's fair.
in more particular, about everything. And so this would kind of bring it up to date, and there wasn't such a thing as REPs 20 years ago.
Right.
Water quality wasn't a big issue 20 years ago. I mean, it was a big issue, but nobody had gotten into it. And so that's my take on it.
That's helpful.
It's just a
So we need to
timely
update it. You're saying.
thing to do. So,
Do I haven't asked anybody in judiciary this honestly, but I know it went to a screeching halt last year in judiciary. Do we know what their biggest concerns were? They had big concerns, but do we know what they really were?
yeah, it was, the lawyers didn't feel they could sue enough, so the trial lawyers are the ones that beat it up. It wasn't landowners or the neighbors or the agency. It was the trial attorneys that went in and
That's helpful. That is really what I'm trying to understand.
yeah, it wasn't the mechanics, but this bill was a lot different than what the House sent over to us last year. See, we never really got it went from House judiciary to Senate judiciary, and it never got back to us to review, if I remember
I
right.
think you're right. Yeah.
And so I,
How does this language relate to that language from the House Ag
the
and
new
Judiciary?
language,
Is it brand new, or is it similar to what we didn't get back last year?
oh, this is basically new.
Okay, so this shouldn't have any stigma attached, like, oh, we rejected that last year, we're not looking at it again this year. This is new, and they should be looking at this with fresh eyes,
Yeah,
if they're being fair to us and whoever. Okay, thank you.
I think that's a fair statement.
Okay.
So, Bill, have you been listening?
Yes, I've been listening.
Turn Bill off a little bit. So what do you think of the new language?
Well, I think the new language is much improved, like the attorney that I've been consulting with said, and he's the same attorney that was on a Zoom conference with several of us late summer. A short, simple version with language that does a few things that farmer really should be protected for. And I think that we're getting there, but the hurdle is getting it past the conservation law and the trial attorneys and some of those folks. They didn't seem to think that the farmer needed anything more than they had in the old law, but the the gentleman from the National Agriculture Law Center in Arkansas, at the University of Arkansas, said, you know, I do presentations all over the country. I'm very familiar with the laws in all of the states that have a agriculture law, right to farm law. He said Vermont's law makes a big impression. The problem you folks have is it's not a favorable impression. He said it's really upheld as an example of something that doesn't work. And those guys seem intent on confining us to something that doesn't do anything for us. So if we want agriculture in this state to be able to invest their money and pursue their interests and work with their neighbors, we need to have something that works for us. It can't all be the other guy. I mean, you got to have a balance here. And I think today's farmer understands that you can't be offensive toward your neighbor and expect him to wave at you. We go out of our way to do a lot of things for neighbors so that there isn't a complaint. I think that the language right now is good. I'm sure there are some tweaks that we're not seeing until we've looked at it a bit farther, until it goes to those committees that are critical of it. And then we'll see what we can get through. In other words, how are you going to make it fly? So they're probably going to try to cut the important stuff out that protects us. But my understanding was that if it was short and simple and the farmer was indemnified to some extent because the farmer was following the required agricultural practices, the farmer has a nutrient management plan in addition, which is a requirement also, just to keep your certification as a medium or a large farm operation. You have to have that nutrient management plan. So if you're doing those things, now the argument would fall to the Agency of Agriculture. In other words, don't go to the farmer and say, I'm taking you to court because of a practice that you didn't observe. If the Agency of Agriculture certifies you annually and you're certified and in compliance, then that disgruntled neighbor should talk to the Agency of Agriculture before they try to take the farmer to court, my understanding. And I think that that's a reasonable thing. It's not that nobody has the right to do anything. They have a state agency that's being paid to do a job to ensure that the farmers are in compliance. And if those neighbors have a complaint, it's nice if they come and say to the farmer, listen, you've done such and such. You know, most farmers would say, let's see how we can remedy this so that you're satisfied. But if they go to the Agency of Agriculture or Agency of Natural Resources, depending on what the case is, those agencies are going to work towards remediating that situation, no question. So it's not that we're denying anybody anything, it's that we don't have the tools to work with so that we can move forward and invest our money and have any confidence that we can stay here and observe our practice. That's the problem.
Well, certainly, yeah. Do you have a copy of the draft that we have in front of us, Phil? Because the first page is just a statement of purpose. The second page is definitions, and then the real meat of the bill is that one page, or no, I guess well, at the bottom of page 3 and page 4. So, you know, we've shortened this up considerably. And so it is pretty short and to the point, but we, as you said, we've still got more work to do, and we should talk about whether we want to put the water quality or nutrient management plan in with the, I mean, it's all part of the RAPs anyways, but it would make another sentence or a few more words in there to add to it. Chairman Hill, you have any comments? You've been with us a couple of days, and you know, you folks have a pretty good sized dairy operation, I believe, and have you got any comments that you'd like to make?
Yeah, just to sort of follow in on Bill's comments. You know, I like the language. I like the fact that it's simple. But we all know, I know some people are worried it's too strong or too, you know, gives us too much protection, but we all know that going in on this first phase of any change, that's never how it's going to pass. So I feel like having the strongest language that protects us going forward is the best. I have to say, from a personal standpoint, we rarely get smell complaints anymore, partly because of the digester, partly because we're doing injection of manure. But, you know, those things, you know, the guy that moves in next door, moved in from New York City, I guess I'd like him not to have to start with the court as opposed to contacting the state to say, hey, what's going on here? So again, putting it out to those people that have the tools to let the other people know what is and isn't acceptable.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So are there other thoughts or comments?
Us? Yeah, no, I appreciate Michael's thing. I would like to hear from, if it's all right, the league and BNRC. If there was such a concern about it, like Bill said, from CLF, let's hear from BNRC, and I'd like to understand what their concern is. Just to hear, I mean, maybe nothing. I mean, if O'Grady's saying there's no environmental impact, yeah, let's hear from BNRC.
Well, we'll get them.
Yeah, that'd be great. And that's it for me, really.
Yeah.
Do we ever hear from CLF? Do we ever invite them in
No.
to head things off? Okay, just checking.
Senator, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So the certification process includes a couple of components there. And one is that you have to be in compliance with the required ag practices. But another is that you have to have the nutrient management plan. Now you get certified to continue operating under your large farm or medium farm operation permit. So the language you should focus on those three categories to see how you want to word your requirement.
Well, the bottom line is, what's the last permit you get, Bill? Isn't it your RAP?
No, you get the last permit you get, if you meet all the requirements under the large farm operation permit, LFO permit, then you get certified. That's the last permit you get, and that's done on an annual basis.
So do we have to spell that all out though in the law, that you have to do A, you have to do B, and then if you get C, you're good to go? Well, if you have to do A and B anyways, to be able to get C certified, why do we have to mention the other A and B?
That's right. If you, I agree with you, you're on, that's, if you're, this farm observes the required ag practices and operates under a large LFO permit and is certified annually. And if the farm is in compliance, that's all anybody needs to know. I mean, you don't need to go through all of the dynamics of it. So you're right.
That would be for an LFO, but if you were a small farm operator, you just have to meet, I mean, you still have to jump through the hoops. But they're different than the LFO, I believe, and so, but they all have to be certified, or they all have to have, is certification required on all 3 levels or 4 levels? Do you know?
My understanding was that it was going to be, I don't know if it is at the lower level at this point.
What? I think last year or the year before, we changed that so they all had to be, had to have accepted ag practices, or required ag practices were levied on all operations.
Yep, I believe that's correct, but I think everybody has to observe the required ag practices, but I'm not sure if the requirement of a small farm has to produce a nutrient management plan at this point or not. I know that was the talk was it was going to be required. I don't know if it has been.
Well, we'll have Laura in to, check that from the agency. Because sometimes some of these problems that really get bad come from the small places, so.
Yeah, I'll just mention, under that subsection B, the activity complies with the requirements of 6 VSA chapter 215. So I'm looking at the statute 215, and there are probably, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe even more sub chapters. There's 10, I guess. And I think Bill's right. I think if it's a really, really small farm, there are occasions probably where they don't have nutrient management plans. But I think that's why Michael, after the language it says chapter 215, comma, including permit requirements or requirements of the RAP. So if there's a small farm that doesn't have a nutrient management plan, they still have to follow the RAPs in order to get this protection. So I think that's why he added that, because I was thinking the same way that Mr. Chair was. If you just said 6 VSA chapter 215 and left it at that, you might not encompass enough to gain that protection. So I don't think there's any harm in spelling out and including the RAPs in that clause, but everything else is in there. There's the LML, mediums, large and small, and all the rest of the water regulations. So it's probably a good idea to get Laura in. Yeah.
We'll have Laura over to go through B. And we'll have Laura in. You want somebody here? You want the league decision?
Yeah, I'd like to just get a sense from the league, if they're hearing, I just want to get our neighbor complaints, their thoughts on it. We're trying to grow housing. Are they hearing anything about this kind of thing? Just curious. I doubt they're going to be concerned. I just think it'd be due diligence. And then just VNRC. I don't know if that's Lauren Hurl or John Groveman. I can't remember which is what. Thanks.
Yeah. So, any other questions? Well,
That was great.
we'll get them in.
Thank you.
As far as, next week's,
That was really helpful, by the way. I mean, I understand it a lot better now that Mike has gone through it.
The side by side was great.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Great.
yeah. And Linda, you want, just give an overview of, next week?
Yeah, on Tuesday, the UVM College of Agriculture and Life Sciences and UVM Extension
Oh, great.
heads are coming in, and the Vermont Land Trust.
That's great.
On Wednesday, there's a group called Universal School Meals Campaign. Who are going to be in the building that day, and they've asked for time, so they will be coming in
Cool.
first. And then there will be a security briefing by Capitol Police, and then food hubs, 3 food hubs, one from Rutland, one from Hardwick, and one from Brattleboro, I believe, will be, and they've been invited anyway. Thursday, Farm to Plate report, we're having 2 joint hearings with the Senate and House Ag. The Farm to Plate report with Alan Taylor and Jake Carroll will be centered in this room. And then the second half of the morning, the organic dairy farm crisis that you heard about yesterday. Maddie Kempner is bringing in some people to talk about that, and they will be in the House Ag, and we'll be joining them via Zoom from this room. Then Friday, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board are in, and we have time to perhaps to fill in with this, what you just asked for.
If we can get these folks in.
Yeah.
We'll,
On Friday.
Sounds like a great week.
so, and, anytime, if any of you have something you wanna get on the agenda, just, let us know and let Brian know and myself.
Yeah.
And, we'll plug it in. But, I don't think, we have anything else, for this morning. Unless some of you have an issue or something you want to discuss. Good?
We're good.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Very
Thank you.
helpful. Very
Yeah.
helpful.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you
Bill.
both.
So we'll,